The number one leading cause of death, costs, and readmissions in hospitals nationwide is a condition called sepsis, or a bloodstream infection. But the standard of care blood test that is used to diagnose sepsis in an average hospital is wrong 40% of the time.
Welcome to the Medical Sales Accelerator podcast. I'm Zed Williamson.
And I'm Clark Wiederhold.
This podcast exists to put scale to the value you get from those great one-to-one conversations at conferences and sales meetings.
Are you making it difficult on your customers to do business with you, or are you doing their homework for them?
And that's why we're speaking with our guest today, Greg Bullington. Greg has deep medical device expertise. Over the past 20 years, he's led engagements and worked with senior executive teams at over 50 companies, ranging from Fortune 100 corporations to venture-backed and early-stage startups. Greg is the CEO and co-founder of Magnolia Medical Technologies, on a mission to eliminate the misdiagnosis of sepsis. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So, I love missions. So let's start there. Tell me about this mission. Elimination is a big deal.
Absolutely. So our journey began over a decade ago when I co-founded the company with the chief of pathology at one of the University of Washington hospitals in Seattle. And Dr. Patton had long been a prominent pathologist nationally, really focused on patient safety. It turns out that the number one leading cause of death, costs, and readmissions in hospitals nationwide is a condition called sepsis, or a bloodstream infection. But the standard of care blood test that is used to diagnose sepsis in an average hospital is wrong 40% of the time. So when we talk about a mission, our mission to zero is to eliminate the existence and the prevalence of these false positive diagnoses that really have significant negative consequences for the patients and the healthcare system alike.
That's massive. It's very scary to think about flipping a coin as almost as good.
Honestly, that really is the reality with this particular problem, because it's associated with infectious diseases and complicated bugs, if you will, and names of bacterial families. Oftentimes, patients can get a bit overwhelmed and not really understand what's taking place. But I would liken it to a scenario where if we had a blood test that was used to diagnose a blood cancer, so let's say leukemia, that was wrong 40 out of 100 times, yet we plugged that patient into a chemotherapy regimen for a week, and 40 out of those 100 times came back to apologize to the patient for the misdiagnosis that was very preventable and for the ensuing treatment that they received unnecessarily. That's really what this scenario is like. When we misdiagnose a patient with sepsis, the aggressive nature of the treatments is significant. Those antibiotics in many ways work like chemotherapy indiscriminately, wiping out all the bacteria in a patient's body. And as you know, we have a lot of good bacteria that's important to maintain a balance. And these patients are very fragile to begin with. So it's a big problem. And that's why we collectively are on a mission to zero to eliminate the misdiagnosis of sepsis.
So I'm going to make a projection. So you're solving a problem that is massive, a huge impact on patient lives, a huge impact on cost. We're actually reducing the treatment people need. So this must be the easiest sale on the planet. You just walk in and the hospital is going, let's go.
It's amazing. We always knew our biggest problem was going to be if we could stamp out enough products to service that unbridled demand from the hospital market. But I'm sure, as you and your listeners have experienced, unfortunately, that's not always the way that decision-making processes take place, particularly in the acute care hospital market. So we've made incredible strides, and we're very proud of the effect and impact that we've had on millions and millions of lives that we've served. But we're really just in the single-digit penetration zone thus far in terms of our penetration into the U.S. market. And so we're excited about the work ahead. And at the same time, sometimes it can be frustrating that it takes the amount of time that it does, because each and every day there are patients that are needlessly misdiagnosed, and there is a definitive increased mortality risk associated with false positive sepsis test results. And so just on the humanistic side, obviously for me and the team, that's a frustrating element that we haven't had a an ability to really solve this at scale overnight. But that remains our mission, and we're making great progress against it.
What's one of your biggest surprises, one of the biggest roadblocks your team's running into as you go down that path with new facilities?
So we're in a unique position because of the fact that our technology is backed by such broad scientific evidence. We actually provide a contractual clinical performance guarantee to our customers. So the question is never, does the solution work? Is this a long felt significant problem that is harmful to patients and expensive to the hospital? The real challenge that we run into is that when you're solving a problem with a prevention-oriented solution, the value proposition is a bit abstract, which is that if you give me $1 today, I can promise you I'm going to give you $5 tomorrow. That's a really difficult and abstract analysis for hospitals to do at scale. So that really is the number one challenge that we navigate, is really demonstrating and working through the cost justification and the economic return, if you will, because the established scope of the problem is very significant, and there's a recognition that this is a big problem, both from an economic and a clinical patient safety standpoint.
So with the contracting piece in place, to kind of playing off of Zed's sarcasm earlier, I'm sure that's just made it extremely easy. Obviously it hasn't. But what have you witnessed that you're surprised your team has to engage in to move the ball down the field?
So we thought early on that having the combination of broad, deep, and consistent clinical evidence, which in our case, our technology platform has been evaluated and published very consistent results in the 85 to 90% reduction of these false positive sepsis tests in over 20 clinical studies, a number of which have been published in the leading peer-reviewed medical journals for these disciplines around infectious diseases and microbiology. So that was step one. And then step two, obviously, is the need to provide evidence that there is a tangible, both hard as well as global cost savings result that you're able to drive. So in that vein, in terms of providing the evidence of the economic cost savings profile, we provided unrestricted research grants to two different groups of investigators a few years back. Those investigators independently spent almost a year conducting all of the line item detailed economic analysis that resulted in the identification of about 130 individual cost line items associated with a false positive sepsis test that would not be incurred if you actually had an accurate negative result to begin with. And so really the evidence and the support, not only just in those two studies, there have been 15 or 20 studies that have been conducted over the course of time here in the recent past, yet we still often run into the challenge of feedback from hospital decision makers that maybe their belief is that the construct of those patient populations is different than their own, that their physicians maybe would make more informed decisions and not have a mistaken misdiagnosis. So there's a lot of challenges when you're relying upon the peer-reviewed literature, even given the high bar and the robustness of those studies, in using that data and using that evidence to drive decision making in the hospital environment.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting a lot of that. That is a problem for everybody, or for a lot of folks out there, but not for us. Thanks, we're good. That sounds like that's what you guys are hearing a lot of.
It's interesting. I think everyone recognizes that they're not good per se. We've put in a lot of effort in really helping to inform the standard settings bodies of the fact that this longstanding issue is a preventable error. And when we look at the way that CMS has integrated quality measures and reporting requirements and value-based purchasing, really those programs have been designed and are intended to encourage good behavior and intended to really encourage the adoption of best practices in the name of patient safety. And so typically we don't run into the pushback that this is a problem that we don't have, or that we don't think that we need to solve. Oftentimes it's because this is a new mousetrap. It's not a cheaper mousetrap. It's not an alternative mousetrap. It's a new mousetrap. It really kind of puts you in a way into the capital budgeting cycle. And that really is where the navigation of an enterprise type selling environment comes into play, which I'm sure many of your listeners battle day in and day out with value analysis committees and otherwise. And so that's really where we spend the bulk of our time, effort, and energy, given that the clinical efficacy profile is so well established.
So those same decision makers, to your point, are hearing from a lot of people in the audience, right? And they're getting lots of value propositions thrown their way. I'm curious. I know when we were speaking before, one of the things you mentioned is the level of detail and work, like pre-work almost done for the customer to help them make those informed decisions, is a piece that has really stood out as the way you guys have adjusted, your approach to the prospects. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So my mantra really is that you have to do your customers' homework for them. And to your point about the level of detail, the results may resemble more of a term paper than a quick paragraph synopsis of the reading you did the night before. So as I mentioned, those studies that look specifically at the cost savings profile associated with each patient instance you're able to eliminate from a false positive sepsis test result, that contained over 130 individual line items of opportunities for cost savings. So we really do the pick and shovel work to ensure that we can demonstrate to the decision makers in the hospital where all of these individual cost savings are derived from. So there is a lot of homework, to your earlier point, in making sure that we've taken all the data from the hospital, sized how big of a problem this is, how many patients this affected in that institution last year, what the range of the cost impacts looks like, and then all the other key quality metrics in terms of length of stay, 30-day readmissions that hospitals don't get paid for. Acute kidney injury is a big challenge with the use of these highly potent antibiotics that have toxicities associated with their use. Hospital-acquired infections and conditions, obviously, CMS and the value-based purchasing universe has really driven a lot of focus around that. So we do go through very robust analysis to do our customers' homework for them and really give them something that they can go validate internally with the experts in each of those respective domains.
It's a tough position because just because you have data on your side doesn't necessarily mean people change their behavior. It's the difference between knowledge and awareness. And I like the approach you're taking because right now, if you don't do that, someone in that position is not sitting around twiddling their thumbs waiting to talk to you, right? They have other things on their mind, being pulled in multiple directions. They're tasked with achieving specific objectives, and you could feel like another obstacle or another distraction. And by doing the work for them and making it so that you're positioning yourself not only as providing a solution, but providing them a way to make a better decision. You're helping them along the way. So I really like the approach.
I think you put it perfectly. And that is one of the big challenges in the acute care hospital world, and in the United States in particular, given the way our reimbursement models work. If you look at what's happened with COVID over several years and then the ensuing staffing crisis and the associated cost crisis really that has resulted thereafter, hospitals have just been inundated with way more issues and way more burning platform priorities than they could ever address. So that really becomes one of the big challenges, is how do you make sure that you are able to get to that top of the prioritization pile? And so that really has informed a lot of the work that we've done in terms of building awareness and knowledge, to your point, with a pretty large bipartisan group of supporters from both the U.S. House of Representatives as well as the United States Senate. because this is a universally challenging problem that affects really every American in one form or another, whether it's a parent or a loved one that is hospitalized and then is put at risk for one of these false positive results that leads to this whole downstream cascade, or whether it's us as individuals. There are really significant consequences, and given the study I mentioned previously that now demonstrates a direct and measurable correlation in terms of increased inpatient mortality, this really is an issue that is a direct patient safety issue that we have successfully driven to the top of the agenda as a priority that needs to be addressed.
Is there awareness from the patient standpoint, from this, if right now, if a patient is told, here's the scenario, your test came back positive, is the information shared that, hey, this is 40% of the time wrong, and here's the treatment? And is there any opportunity for patients to drive some behavior change at the hospital, or is it a completely unknown fact in front of the patient?
It's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, it really is the latter, because of the sophistication, because of the lack of familiarity. Leukemia, I think anyone would understand if that was the diagnosis that was coming back. But when we talk about a bacteremia, we talk about E. coli, we talk about Staph aureus, we talk about coagulus negative staphylococcus. People's eyes glaze over pretty quickly when you get to that level of detail and just a really limited, if any, level of familiarity with these particular types of issues. So I think it's actually quite uncommon that a patient is aware of the risks, number one, and then number two, even after all is said and done, because the way that these false positive are characterized in many hospitals, the practice is actually we wait till the end of the month, and then we go do the analysis on an individual patient and an individual blood test result to determine what we're characterizing or classifying as a false positive versus a true positive. That I think in a lot of instances, probably the vast majority of instances, in fact, the patient is not made aware of that reality. And that's another reason why we focused such significant efforts on highlighting the morbidity and mortality risk associated with this particular test. Because again, sepsis, number one leading cause of death, number one leading driver of costs, number one driver of 30-day readmissions to hospitals. And that's a really big problem where the patient really needs advocacy from those that understand what's happening and, more importantly, how we fix it.
So I imagine your sales team is a passionate bunch, because they are coming from the perspective of truly knowing that something different is available. This is a test. Sometimes if you're dealing in other things, a different outcome is potentially available, but there's all these other variables. And this feels like it's just there, just do it this way. And I know my time when I was in sales, if the company that I was working for said, oh, and by the way, we guarantee this outcome, that's got to get some people's mouth watering. Can you walk me through a little bit of an explanation of what you mean by that? Because it almost sounds too good to be true.
Well, to your point, we're in a bit of a unique position. Most things in medicine run along shades of gray as opposed to binary black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And the diagnosis and treatment of patients that are suspected of having a bloodstream infection is definitely not black and white. However, one of the black and white elements is whether or not we have a blood test result that is indicating a clinical situation that is not reality. And that is really where this incremental risk, this incremental avoidable risk comes into play. And so since we have binary definitions of what constitutes true positive versus true negative versus false positive results, that really does give us the ability to directly and quantitatively evaluate the impact of our intervention. And so we are lucky from that standpoint that we can guarantee that hospitals know what their starting baseline false positive rates are. That is a tracking requirement from the College of American Pathologists, which accredits all the labs nationally. So this is not a new tracking mechanism or a new metric. Hospitals know how many false positives they had. And the effect of our technology is also immediate. So when we come and implement a new customer and we come convert the emergency department, we launch our Mission to Zero program. So we have an education component. We have a kind of an awareness and knowledge component to really communicate to the end users why this is an important problem, why this is a patient safety issue, why the hospital cares in terms of the economic impacts. But once we deploy that new standard of care, it really is flipping the switch. And so you can immediately see that dramatic reduction in those false positives. And then whether you want to rely on the literature or go try to conduct your own internal versions of these peer-reviewed studies, those 130 plus line items of avoidable cost opportunities directly start accruing cost savings to the hospital. And that's, I think, a really unique profile of a medical device innovation that really has that immediate of an impact and has the kind of support from a peer-reviewed literature standpoint that our technology does from both a clinical as well as cost effectiveness standpoint.
Yeah. We talk a lot about challenges with various folks, including yourself on this podcast. And because everybody's looking for that little nugget or the extra edge they can bring into their business to continue to move the needle. It's worth pointing out that with all of the challenges, with the complexity of what you're talking about, the awareness and education that we've discussed here, your team is growing and you guys are really changing lives at facilities. And if I understand correctly, you guys are also, you're growing in a clip where you're always looking for good talent. Is that correct?
100%. So we have been on a very consistent, very significant growth rate for an extended period of time. And we're really just getting started. As I mentioned earlier, we're only a few percentage points penetrated into this multi-billion-dollar market that we invented and have cultivated and developed and have protected from an intellectual property standpoint. I'm sure as you guys have experienced or discussed with other emerging growth medical device or medical technology companies, intellectual property is a really important element of your core foundational strategy. That's why we're in the position that we are, which is that we've been able to garner the support of tier one institutional investors. And I've raised about $125 million of capital to really fuel and build this market. But to your point about talent on the commercial front, we have a hugely passionate group of individuals on our team that really get up each and every day recognizing that at some point it's going to be each of us on that bed. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I have parents that are in their late 70s, early 80s. We've unfortunately had some of those experiences of being in the hospital for things that have come up. And to me, that remains a really driving force, is wanting to ensure that as rapidly as we can, we help as many patients as we can so that anyone who ends up in a hospital in the United States is a beneficiary of access, or has the benefit rather of access to best-in-class technology to avoid false positive diagnoses for sepsis and all of those downstream implications. And that's really the driving force of the DNA of our sales team and our commercial team, is really that focus on how do we help as many patients as we can, as quickly as we can. And if we're successful doing that, everything else just falls into place in terms of our continued growth, in terms of our ability to access capital to continue to scale, to commercialize many of the new products and new technologies in our product roadmap and pipeline. So we are always on the lookout for great talent. We have many open positions across the country, given the pace at which we're growing. So certainly tier one talent and kind of fostering that continued team growth and cultivation is a huge area of focus for us.
Nice.
It's an interesting, I love bias, heuristics, the brain, behavior. And what I really like about this is, You're not out trying to change a physician's behavior in regards to how they treat something or how they do a procedure. You're literally saving someone from a harmful treatment when it's unnecessary. And it's almost that if you saw someone in danger and you could pull them out of it, who wouldn't do that? And then to be able to spend every day knowing that's what you did, that's got to be a pretty awesome driver for the people who are bought into the concept, because that's not the norm. You know, it's sometimes you can feel like you're banging your head against the wall because you're trying to achieve something new and different, where literally there's that person there and you're pulling them out of the traffic, right? You're just, it's awesome.
No, I think your point is spot on. And nothing in life is easy, and certainly changing anything in medicine. I recall early on when we were just getting things started, and my business partner and co-founder, Dr. Patton, made the offhand comment that, you got to be prepared here, because from the point in time that there is a new practice in medicine that has real, legitimate, true evidence behind it, changing a standard of care on average takes 17 years. And I thought that sounded like the craziest thing ever. If we have technology that's 10 times better, if we have technology that delivers a 5x ROI profile in an average hospital, there's no way it's going to take 17 years. But in medicine, I think there's also a reality of nobody wants to be first. So that's the first hill you got to overcome. But fortunately, we now find ourselves in the downhill position there where nobody wants to be last. And so, to your point, we spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of focus on doing everything we can each and every day to pull more people out of that street. And, given that we each have families and loved ones that could potentially be put at risk at some point in time, that's another major driver for us. Just an anecdote, I had an uncle that had a lung transplant several years ago and had fairly significant complications associated with rejection and otherwise. And so he found himself frequently readmitted to the hospital, and really kind of a diagnostic goose chase often to try to determine what was causing his fevers and low blood pressure and rapid respiratory rate, all of which are symptoms of sepsis. And so I remember one night my mom called and said, hey, I'm really concerned that her brother was going to be misdiagnosed again and mistreated again. And given his fragile state of health, really wanted to do anything in her power to prevent that from happening. And so she said, hey, is there any possibility I could, buy a case of the SteriPath product and have it shipped overnight up to the hospital in Michigan? And, I'll do anything to try to help prevent him receiving treatment that he shouldn't. And, that really has always stuck with me. Obviously, that's not the way hospital medicine works. You can't FedEx a box of medical devices for someone to bring in the front door of the hospital appropriately. But it really did just stick with me in terms of that notion of wanting to be in a position where every patient that is on this potential spectrum has access to the best in breed technology to prevent a totally preventable misdiagnosis and all that ensuing clinical and economic risk that doesn't need to be incurred.
Greg, I really appreciate you taking the time today. And it sounds like there's some open positions in that mission to zero. Am I getting that right? Mission to zero. I like the simplicity of that. I like the focus. If that connects with anyone who's listening right now, should they go to your website? What would you want them to do if they are interested in learning more?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is magnolia-medical.com. There's a lot of great resources there. There's an overview of our Mission to Zero program. There's a lot of descriptive content around both our first generation technology as well as our new technology that was recently cleared by the FDA, our SteriPath Micro platform. And there's also access to all the clinical and cost effectiveness evidence that I referenced here. So magnolia-medical.com, or if folks want to reach out directly to me via LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn, and I think the handle is G Bullington, Bullington. So LinkedIn is also a great place to connect.
Excellent. We will put both of those links in the show notes for easy access for the people. And Greg, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Likewise, thanks for having me, and great to have an engaging dialogue with both of you here today.
Absolutely. And so listeners, also visit medicalsalesaccelerator.com. While you're there, you can sign up to receive emails to find out about upcoming episodes. You could submit a guest or a topic, and you can download a resource to make you better at communicating with your customers.
If you found value in today's episode, do a few things for me. I want you to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Give us some stars. We love the 5 stars. Leave us a review, and then go to the square with the arrow out of the top. Send it to your friends, your family, your colleagues, your mama and your daddy. We greatly appreciate it. Greg, it was a pleasure. You guys have an awesome mission, and I can't wait till you achieve that mission to 0. Make it a great week, everybody.